self-storage units. We have self-storage units in town, including some that were permitted, some, well, before I was here, and I've been here a little over 10 years, so 12 or 15 years ago on Kelly Road, west of 95, for example. But there is no provision, explicit provision for them. So there's always been interpretation as to what happens to them. Over the last year, we've had a couple of other inquiries about them, you know, and thus the need to try to get some clarity on it. The way it's tended to be handled up to this point by previous code enforcement officers is to call self-storage units warehousing. There's a use in our list of uses called warehousing and trucking terminals. And so it got kind of absorbed into that. But then as a further confusing matter, warehousing and trucking terminals are only allowed in certain parts of the economic development zone and not at all in the commercial one zone and only in certain geographies of the town, and nothing fits. So this is an attempt to clear that up. The proposal is to separately define and clarify the difference between self-storage units on the one hand and warehousing and trucking terminals. And because warehousing businesses sometimes get combined with wholesale businesses sometimes get combined with warehousing if they are a wholesale enterprise, you know, large wholesale enterprise that takes delivery and trucks them out, they get combined with warehousing. But sometimes they don't. Sometimes they're just jobbers who never take delivery of anything, and they just sit in an office and virtually take delivery and then send them off to wherever. So once you open that door, as I said, you begin to open up these other things that need some attention. So the first thing we do here is to separately define them. And in this case, we have tried to follow the North American Industrial Classification System, which is a standard coding of industrial sectors in the United States, and tried to borrow from the federal definitions of these different units, of these different uses. And so what we're saying here is that a self-storage facility would be primarily a personal service. It's where you store things for later retrieval. It can be used and is used by some small-scale commercial enterprises that store some goods in such a facility, which they later pick up and deliver to another destination. But it's typically storage of goods for the clients or the tenants' later use, and does not involve large-scale warehousing or large-scale trucking operations, nor does it serve as a retail sales location or a major retail sales location outside of, you know, maybe an annual sale to get rid of stuff that's been abandoned. So self-storage facility is defined. Warehousing, in contrast, is is a business that's involved in a storage of stocks of raw materials and merchandise for other businesses pending distribution of the goods or merchandise by those businesses. It is something that's larger scale typically, and does in fact involve trucking, and that's why I think our scheduled uses includes the two in one breath. I mean, a trucking terminal could be something different. You know, Dysart's trucking terminal is not also a warehouse or a wholesale operation. It's a trucking terminal, but there are warehouses. You can think of Hannaford Brothers down in South Portland, which is a very large warehousing operation, but it's also a trucking terminal and a wholesale operation all wrapped up into one. But we define warehousing as something distinct from the self-storage facilities. Then wholesale businesses are businesses that are involved in the supply chain of commercial goods, in which the merchandise is acquired and specifically for resale. They can be large scale, as I mentioned, involved with warehousing and trucking, but they may just simply be an office-based use. So, given all that, those definitions, the question is, where do they fit within the zoning map? And right now, if you look on that proposed chart, the self-storage facilities are brand-new use in the chart. And what's proposed here is that they be allowed in the Commercial 1 district, which is located, the only Commercial 1 district in the town is located out by exit 193, where the University Mall is, or on the other side where Friends and Friends is, and the veterinarian's office, and several vacant parcels. And you can see it in the pink up at the sort of northern end of 95 as it's going through Orono. So we would allow it there, but only west of 95. The council in committee recommended that and asked for your guidance on that, but they recommended it because self-storage units typically can operate without public water, public sewer. And so rather than taking up public water, public sewer lots, and also they're not always, they're fairly utilitarian, and so they might not fit with the image for a commercial corridor or within a business park. So they suggested that, and so we have put it in this way as being in the Commercial 1 district west of 95, or in the economic development zone, which is where it is now. The economic development zone is that dark brown color. You can see a small, at both interchanges, a small area, relatively small area east of 95 by Kelly Road, but a very large area west of 95 and off of Kelly Road. And then an area which is a portion, the majority portion of the main technology park is the economic development zone. Again, west of 95. So that's what's proposed for self-storage facilities. Warehousing and trucking terminals would similarly be allowed only in the C1 and EDZ districts west of 95. The idea is that they would have the opportunity to locate, if ever any came. We don't have any, and I know of none proposed, but if there were any, that you'd want to probably buy the interchange. Here they'd be west of 95. They may require the extension of water or sewer, depending on the kind of operation they were. But that's the proposal. We look for your guidance on that. And then finally, wholesale businesses, which are currently recognized in the ordinance, just not defined, but they're recognized as scheduled uses, are already allowed in the Commercial 1 district. The Commercial 2 district. The Commercial 2 district are commercial districts that envision smaller scale commercial activities plus residential, higher density residential uses. And so there's a large Commercial 2 zone along Park Street where all the apartment projects have been going. There are some small ones along Main Street toward VZ. Those are the primary ones. Yeah, there are 3 along Main Street. There's one where the VanSyckle project was discussed. There's one where the Penobscot Valley Dermatology Office and the Linkview Inn are located. And then there's one at the VZ town line where gas and the salvage facilities, construction facilities are. So if they involve no outdoor storage, they can be anywhere in any of those 4 zones. If they involve outdoor storage, they can also be, under current ordinance, be anywhere in those 4 zones. I'm proposing that change to be not allowed in the C2 district if it's going to be outdoor storage, because that's not compatible with the purpose of the C2 district, which is meant to be smaller scale commercial activities smaller scale in terms of building size and so forth, and really not meant to be, have an industrial kind of appearance. Stuff that is meant to fit in with neighborhoods and residential activity. And I'm also proposing that in the economic development zone, if there's going to be outdoor storage, it would only be allowed where warehousing and trucking terminals are allowed, which would be west of 95. So that's the proposal. I've included key questions that I had along the way, because this is a matter of judgment, and I emphasize we have nobody proposing anything at this point. We've had a couple inquiries about self-storage facilities in the last year. None of those have come to fruition, and no proposals, but nothing in the other uses. So this is a cleaning up, but we don't want to regret decisions now, or if and when a proposal does come in, either by having been too restrictive or too opening the door too wide. Should warehousing and trucking terminals be allowed in both the EDZ and the C1 districts? It's not really, doesn't fit really well in the purpose statement of the EDZ district, but that's where they're presently allowed. In one part of the EDZ under the current ordinance. They're allowed, ironically, in the EDZ zone at exit 193, which is the main tech park, which doesn't seem to make sense. And I don't know why those decisions were made back along, but that's what it is. So I kept it in the ED zone for purposes of this public hearing and discussion. So that's the proposal, and I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Before I open up for public hearing, I'll just have questions from the board. I was thinking of one, we discussed during the comp plan process, food hubs, and my memory, I was thinking of the 191 exit,
Yes.
the earlier exit, and so food hubs, to me, seem to fall into one of these categories, and it seemed to be a good fit at the time in the development that we approved that has not been built.
Right, a food hub could be small, it could be large. It could be a small, in Unity, there's a food hub that's a former school.
Right.
Good Shepherd Food Bank has now acquired a facility that is essentially a food hub,
Yeah.
but it's very large, 50,000 plus square foot building in Hamden that will undoubtedly have truck traffic and, fairly constant routine truck traffic and so forth. So, yes, but that would be a warehousing, storage, distribution kind of use. So that's exactly
And that's what I was
right.
thinking about limiting, if we put them on the other side, we discussed those types of businesses.
As desirable.
And, it could be a very convenient stop for, farmers up in the county.
Yes.
To come down, so I'm just trying to figure out if we want tenants, or we're just looking for proposed uses in the park we approved.
Yes.
Not really, doesn't seem appropriate maybe for the tech park, but what was discussed, the mixed-use park that
Right.
was approved,
Yeah.
that would seem to be a decent candidate, and this would limit that.
Yep, and it might be fine for the tech park too. It really depends. There's such a wide range of what
Yeah.
it could be. And so it's hard. I mean, you could put a size limit. For example, you say, if it's no more than 20,000 square feet, something, but because that would imply
Yeah.
a smaller level of truck traffic and things like that.
And it's right near the
Largest one.
interchange, so you'd have the infrastructure there. That's,
Okay.
this seems to limit, but that was just because of the food hub, because we talked a lot about it. It seemed like an important concept in our
Yes.
comp plan.
I think the council's looking for your thoughtful recommendations. I don't think anybody's fixed in any of those positions. This is a
Okay,
way to get the conversation going.
all right,
So, a facility that's already open, like a U-Haul,
I'm sorry?
a place that's already open in C2 district, like the U-Haul Storage Center, right there on Park Street, would they be grandfathered in? Because they also have storage on the lot too.
Yeah, that's a self-storage facility, and it's a legally non-conforming use. Right now, as far as I believe, the interpretation of self-storage units is that it would today not be allowed in the C2 district. So if you want it in the C2 district, that would have to be added. Right now, as far as I can tell, it's only allowed in some portions of the EDZ based on past interpretations. but I wouldn't rely on that just because there are a lot of ambiguities in the way, so that right now would be a self-storage facility that is a legally non-conforming use in the C2 district.
Okay.
New ones could not occur under the current ordinance, nor under what's being proposed here in the C2 district.
I don't recall, I'm just thinking, again, for a food hub, maybe a larger one, again, depending on who would want to go in there, but in the park, or the business park that we approved, I just don't recall the size of the lots, whether it would even allow for.
They would have had to consolidate 2 or 3 lots,
Right.
assemble 2 or 3 of those lots and combine them. Because that park was more designed for office, R&D,
Right.
hotel kinds of use. There's certainly land there for it.
Yep.
But it would have to, because the lots were in the 2-acre, of the 2-acre variety,
All right,
and they were somewhat clustered.
yep.
So I've got a quick question on the self-storage facility. It seems to me like we need to define really what that is, because if you look at the first sentence, it says it means a facility that provides secure, fully enclosed spaces rented or leased to clients or tenants for the storage or retrieval of clients' goods. But I live on Kelly Road, for instance, and there are 2 of these right handy to where I live, and they're a very different proportion. We've got a large one, I'm supportive of both of them. We've got a large one and we've got a small one. But it would seem to me, just looking at the map, if someone was in a low-density residential or, an F&A zone, if they wanted to have a small one and they had a spare building and they wanted to lease that out for storage, why would we want to restrict that? That's an economic opportunity for the town. So it seems to me we'd want to be able to, where it would fit outside, certainly not in the downtown region, the MDR region or whatnot, but I'm just thinking if I'm a farm, let's say, or if I have a bunch of land in the LDR zone and I'm not using a building and I want to rent it out to somebody, why not allow that? Certainly
Yeah.
not.
So you may be, what may be behind or what you might be suggesting is that there might be a size threshold where it can be
Right.
allowed in some places, but if it's over a certain size, it could only be allowed in more restricted areas.
I guess I kind of read this to imply that it's on the larger scale, and I'm thinking more on the mom and pop scale.
Yeah, right now, there is, it imagines no scale.
Right.
It could be small or large. It's really the use, that it's primarily for personal goods and services that you store and then retrieve later on. It's a personal service as much as anything else, rather than being in the chain of supply, a commercial supply chain. But a size threshold is not an unusual thing to include, and you could include in more places.
It's an interesting point. I hadn't even
Just think,
considered that. Yep.
if someone's got a 2-car
Yep.
garage and they're not using one bay and they want to lease one out, to a neighbor or something, it seems like if we impose this, they wouldn't be able to do that.
Thoughts on that?
How would we enforce it in first
It says
place?
fully enclosed spaces. We could say a minimum of 3 or 4 fully enclosed spaces. And that would leave things that are less than that outside of this
Yeah,
definition.
it could be that, or it could be square footage, like anything in excess of 5,000 square feet or 3,000 square feet or something like that.
That's true, then
Would
then
hit
we wouldn't
this.
have to regulate that, we'd just have the
Right.
minimum in this definition, and then you'd have flexibility outside of that.
Or existing buildings, no new construction, like,
Yeah.
up in the county, the farmers that don't store potatoes, they store people's campers and stuff in their
Right.
empty potato houses, and it's just, you just drive up and put it there, you left it for the winter.
Yep.
And that's what you're probably referring to.
Right.
It's a good suggestion. Thoughts on that, Jason?
Yeah, I agree with that.
Just a little more flexibility, so I'm not sure what that threshold would be. I mean, what a minimum would be in this definition, but,
It seems to me that anything greater than 2 bays or something should be, I'm just thinking about someone that would have like a 2-car garage that
I get you, yeah.
they're not using, and
Yep. good suggestion.
Well, I can figure out what the typical would be of, of a large, let's say an oversized
Yep,
two-car garage thing that might be a threshold. It would be probably a couple thousand square feet.
I guess I'm in favor of making the threshold in terms of the number of units rather than total square feet.
If the units were each 5,000 square feet, would that be okay?
I mean, so that I don't know how big those units are out there on Kelly Road, but they're not super big.
No, they're not, but
Some of them
you
are
could have,
pretty
if you're talking about RV storage or something like that, you could have, here's one unit that'll take 5 RVs and it's 3,000 square feet, and then here's another one that's take another 5, and that's, number of units is,
Well, I'm just trying to differentiate between somebody renting out a bay in their garage, or maybe their barn, which each would qualify as one unit, and one of these organized places that has numbered units, 1,
Yes.
2, 3, 4, however
Right.
many it is.
right, and those are typically 500 or 700 square feet or something like that.
thoughts on units, square footage?
The person who's using it to rent, to store seasonal RVs is not gonna have in and out traffic as a person who has a smaller units, that has someone that's using the facility every day to retrieve personal items, or else is staging it for, if they do, yard sales and stuff, and they have a whole bunch of yard sale stuff that they go in and out of. That's the difference, that would be a difference in traffic that was going in and out of the gate or in and out of a facility, compared to, another consideration of someone just storing a camper for the winter. You're not gonna see them again until April.
Right.
So we have two concepts on it, square footage or number of units. I'm just thinking, I heard you mention that you could come up with a typical, I'm not sure which is the better scenario right now. I can't say I have a
I mean,
preference.
it could be either or,
Right, yeah.
no more than X units and no
Yeah.
more than Y square feet.
That would cover it.
You could
Yeah,
do that,
sure,
and,
yeah.
and you'd be more liberal as to where they're located if they're below that
Do
threshold.
we make a motion to make?
Not yet, this is still a
Yeah.
public hearing, you haven't
Right,
opened the
yeah.
hearing yet, and,
Just discuss.
No, yeah, so,
if you hear other comments, you may be influenced and you're thinking about
can
it.
we direct town staff to come up with a typical or a minimum?
Mhm.
I don't want to decide that, and I'm not sure that we're prepared to now, just to.
Yeah, no, sure, you can do that, but,
Right.
why don't you see if there's any public comment, and
I'm
then,
gonna, yep, very good. I am gonna open the public hearing. You're up, public. Do you have any comments? I'll leave the public hearing open. Other questions, comments? That was a very good one. What about, there was a removal, Evan said, just didn't feel that wholesale businesses with outdoor storage was an appropriate use in C2. I agree with that. That's the mix of residential that does not seem to agree with like a definition of a C2 zone.
Well, I agree with that, and just given our meeting last month,
Mhm.
where we had a C2 situation that didn't fit with the neighborhood,
Yeah.
this would avoid having that kind of thing again.
So that seems reasonable. Other thoughts? Again, I'm just going back to the comp plan. Some of you participated, some of you did not. But the food hub concept is something that Orono might be able to expand on. We heard a lot of information, and it was something that was proposed to us. It wasn't right on the table at the beginning, but the more we talked about it, received public comment, it made it in the comp plan, and it was a fairly strong idea. And one of the proposals, or just, one of the ideas was that it could be in the business park off of exit 191. Limiting that, just that thought by the council or what Evan proposed, would not allow that. So do we want to also consider a scale, what would be allowed in the business park? Because right now, he flashed up, everything's going to be over on the side of the self-storage units. I'm not sure that we want to limit that, because right now, we need tenants And that would seem to be a reasonable one for the business park, in my opinion.
My only concern would be that if this thing is successful, it might want to grow. And it would be a good thing to put it someplace where there's actually room for it to grow.
Mhm.
And I think the business park is somewhat limited in, space available for growth. It might fit there very nicely when it first appeared, and then later on,
Mhm.
if it really works out well,
Right.
there might not be enough space for it.
Unless they purchase property and demolish it.
Other thoughts on that? That's a good point, but right now, there's no infrastructure, no businesses. I'm just trying to figure out what might draw businesses here, and the town was committed to the infrastructure. There, it is close by to the interchange, so that it's a real advantage.
And it's
So,
got water and sewer.
yeah, right, so,
Those are pluses.
correct. So Krista makes a very valid point, but other thoughts on that?
So are we saying to put that back in?
Right, and I'm not saying just call out businesses related to a food hub, but that's the one that just jumps out at me based on comp plan discussions and what might fit in I'm just thinking the business part.
You're defining a food hub like a Hannaford's distribution center or a
Yeah,
Walmart? or-
concepts that were talked about, okay, so it's close to Bangor, and say you have farmers that want to store, market their goods, and they would come down the highway, and I guess we have an advantage. They'd get to Orono first before they'd have to go into Bangor. It's real easy access. So I'm trying to remember, what were the other
Yeah,
examples?
Well, yeah, the food hub is a place that aggregates foods, produce, or meats, or other products, but often just produce, from multiple smaller producers in order to penetrate institutional and other grocery and other markets that the smaller producers cannot penetrate on their own. And Good Shepherd actually functions as a food hub. It does that, but it distributes not to institutions and so forth, but to food banks, on behalf of their clients. But it functions in that same way. And so there are a number of examples of food hubs around. They have somewhat different business models. There's one in Skowhegan, around the granary that they produce. There's one in Unity, run by Maine Farmland Trust. There's one down in Westbrook, somewhat small scale. You may have heard of Crown of Maine, which is really a wholesaling distributor, but they function in some ways in the marketplace as a food hub. It's really a combination of warehousing, storage, including cold and storage and freezers, and distribution. They take possession. I mean, in some models, they take possession of the produce then it's up to them to distribute. In some cases, they store on behalf of others who never take possession. But that's business model. That's so not that doesn't affect the land use. The land use impacts are the same either way. So it's a warehousing slash wholesaling slash distribution, which includes trucking activity.
Is there safeguards to keep something like that from working its way into a farmer's market where the public finally, figures out that there's a whole bunch of stored food here and the individuals might start selling it on a Saturday or a Sunday or individually?
Oh, I don't know. I don't think food hubs are not so involved in facilitating the direct sale from farmers to the end consumer. And that would become a retail operation. If the food hub did, they become a retailer. And, if it's allowed in the zone, it's allowed. If it's not allowed in the zone, it's not
I
allowed.
was thinking of all the density of restaurants, Orono and Bangor area. We could snag them, trucks coming from the county, stop in Orono first. I don't, it's
Yeah,
just.
food hub
coming
is just
from that
one example. I mean, it's an
Right.
example of, I think the chairman is talking about an example of a desirable activity
Right.
that we wouldn't want to shut out by the zoning. But it's just a type of warehousing, so you can't just say food hubs, of course, you'd say warehouses. So you gotta be comfortable with the idea of warehousing and storage and trucking activity in that location.
Right. But if I remember, just to refresh, again, some of you didn't see that application, but we approved it's mixed use, but up behind the Boy Scouts is where the lot is. You could see they actually cut a pretty wide swath for the road right-of-way. Nothing's ever built, but the idea was, again, water and sewer, and I think it was off to the left side, so if you get to the top of the hill and veer toward, behind the Boy Scouts, there was more like these types of business lots, and then off to the right might be more professional office
Yeah.
spaces, what I recall.
Yep.
Years ago, so, I don't, this doesn't strike me, again, the food hub, I'm not trying to think of every example that could go in there, and there may be some undesirables, but this is the one that comes to mind, so I don't, like he said, I don't wanna just narrow it down to that, but. So thoughts on that? Council mentioned west of that, I'm not sure if they were
Well, they
considering.
didn't mention that. That's,
Okay.
it's confused in the ordinance right now. Right
Okay.
now, the only place warehousing and trucking terminals are allowed are in the main technology park, in the EDZ portion of the main technology park. I don't know why that's the case.
Yeah.
It doesn't seem to fit there and seems to exclude places where it might fit better. But we're in the process of trying to correct that, if there is a correction required.
Seems like food hubs and trucking warehouses and all this would want to be handy to the interstate.
Mhm.
And so then, by that nature, they're not gonna wanna be in the university zone or downtown or whatnot. They're gonna wanna be handy to the interstate. And so, seems like we'd wanna recommend that the code recognize that and do everything we can to make it attractive for other businesses to come to the zones handy to the interstate.
Mhm.
Whatever all that means in this.
So right now, I mean, commercial uses, Evan walked us through. We've got warehousing and trucking terminals. You know, at the bottom of that second page, it says it's allowed in C1 west of I-95, and right now it shows EDZ west of 95. So Evan, I don't see the map, but wouldn't it, so what we might propose is that it would just be allowed in EDZ, and then perhaps apply a scale to that business? Or just in the business park? I mean, I'm trying to figure out how to,
No, you could. I think the commercial one district, west of 95 is not
yeah.
at all unsuitable if the use is something that the town wants to
Let's see, could
provide.
this,
And I'm sorry, I wasn't talking into the mic, sorry.
could this fit under wholesale business? Because if it fits under wholesale business, our food hub, then we already say if it has no outdoor storage, and we're not going to store food outdoors, then it's already allowed in C1, C2, EDZ, and the university.
That's a good point too, so wholesale business.
So
Go
it's
back to
only
the
with
definition,
outdoor
yeah.
storage that it's banned to the far side of I-95.
Thoughts on that? That
Well,
might,
a food hub in
Yeah.
many cases operates as a wholesale activity. There's sometimes when it doesn't take delivery and more often than not is a wholesaler. They're often nonprofit companies. We don't often think of some of these as in the same way because they're nonprofit, but yes, they would.
so it'd be a
like
matter
that.
of, if somebody came to town staff would direct them which definition they fell in.
Yeah, I mean, if they function as a wholesaler, then they'd be wholesaler.
And so, Evan, do you see any need to call out as a definition food hub, or could it?
No, food hub is a very specific thing, and as a use, it is no different in terms of impacts, on roads and intensity of use on a lot and pavement, it'd be the same thing. And if the food hub went away, some other enterprise could go in and do the same thing with with washing machines.
Okay, that may change the discussion, then if we go back to that question, right now as is, warehousing and trucking terminals are allowed in C1 or in the proposed allowed uses, C1 and EDZ, west of 95. So that's assuming food hubs would fit into wholesale businesses, as Krista said. Thoughts on, because, I'm thinking of the FedEx facility, I guess that's what, like UPS, a lot of large trucks coming and going. Those are pretty large scale over in Bangor, and ones in Brewer.
Yes.
Those are pretty big. That does not seem to fit into the business park, and I guess in my mind.
They're land extensive uses, and they have noise and lots of ins and outs, and the question is compatibility with residential areas or with office uses. They might be in some cases, they may not be.
Yeah, the Brewer, the UPS facility, that there's an access road and there are businesses nearby, but I'm not sure that it's not an ideal situation, so. Thoughts on that? I mean, maybe that's just a grander scale than the food up thing that I was bringing up. But
And by the way, you always do have site plan review and other things to review things
Right.
by, but with a caution that if it's listed as an allowed use,
Right,
you as a planning board just can't say no because you don't think it's appropriate there. There'd have to be a reason, traffic or public safety or something that could not be mitigated in order to deny an application.
yeah, I don't want to beat this thing to death, but the definition point, that might clear this up, so.
Yeah, I guess, is there any reason to put any restrictions in the EDZ zone for these self-storage units in thinking ahead if that's going to block a business opportunity for a more traditional warehouse or something like that?
Very good point. The only thing that really crossed my mind, and Evan brought it up, that those uses typically don't use water and sewer, so it didn't matter where they went. I would think, because water and sewer, high value, as far as normal businesses are gonna want that, but you can put up a garage anywhere. So that resonated with me when you mentioned that. So, good question. Any other thoughts on that? Are we okay with sticking with that? Self-storage units, C1, EDZ, west of 95, just stick with that? A lot of lots over there, they could fit and they don't take up water and sewer lots. I agree with that.
With the caveat that we talked about earlier.
Yes, correct with it, yep. All right, so back to, I don't want to beat this thing to death, but, so let's just take a quick look. So are we okay with warehousing and trucking as is then? Assuming those are the really larger scale trucks coming and going, those would be limited to the lots in EDZ and C1 west of 95.
Yes.
Yes.
All right, so last one is looking at, again, the wholesale businesses, as Krista pointed out. We could keep our food hub in the business park. There's no limits with no outside storage. But again, keeping like the wholesale businesses with outside storage, it was struck in C2. I agree with that. It doesn't seem to mix with residential, smaller scale businesses within, with residences in there. That makes sense. So how are we with C1 anywhere? EDZ west of 95 and the university zone.
Yes.
Are we okay with that as proposed? Following along? I mean, so there's no limitation. We take it out of C2. Keep it west of 95 with outside storage and anywhere in the university zone. All right then, so coming out of this, our recommendation, I guess I'm gonna close the public hearing, but our recommendation will be then to add the language to a little more flexibility with self-storage. And Evan's gonna come up with a suggestion, whether it's, you know, it's the and situation, or.
Either or.
Yeah, either or, so. So with your discussion to council, again, I don't, just, I mean, if you just mention the food hub part of our discussion, so whether they want to reconsider and, you know, come up with any points that we might have missed, but I don't know if the emphasis, you know, again, I just keep thinking back to the comp plan, what we wanted out of that document.
Yes. Good point.
Yep.
So if I were to, pending your vote on a recommendation,
Yep.
what I'm hearing is, I just want to make sure I've got it right, that with respect to self-storage, keep it as is, but add that flexibility as to scale
Yes.
on number of units and size of square footage of area.
Mm-hmm.
Keep the warehousing trucking terminals as proposed here,
Mm-hmm.
and keep the wholesale businesses with no outdoor storage and the one with outdoor storage as it is proposed here.
Correct.
Okay, with a discussion about the food hub, just making sure that they're comfortable that that would be properly fit in a category if the opportunity ever arose.
Mm-hmm. You all good with that? Public hearing,
Yeah.
we need,
I think you just need to make a motion
Procedurally,
that,
okay.
that be a recommendation to the council, and I'll prepare the report accordingly.
Okay, I will move that we recommend to the council that the definitions of, amend section 18-31, definitions by adding definitions for self-storage facility, warehousing, and wholesale business as follows, and that we go with this as we have it, as it was presented to us, just with the further detail added about the amount of space or number of spaces that would fit with self-storage facility.
And that below that threshold, it would basically not be regulated. I mean,
that would be good.
Yeah.
Very good, thank you, Chris. Do I have a
I second it.
second? Any further discussion? Just hearing none, all those in favor? Thank you, that was good discussion. All right, moving on, we have another ordinance, a proposed amendment to the Land Use Ordinance amending definitions in districts for types of travelers lodging. This, again, is a hearing continued from July 27, 2016.
this comes directly from the comprehensive plan. The comprehensive plan in the economic development section suggested that the town try to build a stronger visitor economy with the university here and other destinations around, and that it suggested that the types of accommodations recognized in our zoning ordinance, our land use ordinance right now, are quite limiting. It's either a hotel or it's a bed and breakfast, which must be operated as a home occupation. Guests can't be there more than 3 consecutive nights, and there could only be, I think, can't remember if it's 2 or 3 rooms, no more than 4 visitors. So that's it, and there's nothing else recognized. Meanwhile, we're seeing the, the shared economy, the Airbnb type of thing grow, and there are a number of such accommodations available here in Orono, as well as throughout the region and the country, the world. There are also instances where, large homes and things like that may be having difficulty in the future staying in single-family owner-occupied dwellings. So there are for a number of reasons, the comprehensive plan recommended that we create the opportunity for a more diverse array of travelers' accommodations. And so what's proposed here is a hierarchy of accommodations that at the smallest level would be something called a homestay. In the industry, there's a homestay which we would define as a type of home occupation in a single-family owner-occupied dwelling that has no more than 2 bedrooms, serving no more than 4 transient guests at a time, and it limits the stays to 7 consecutive days and 14 days per calendar year. It would be permitted everywhere with a permit from the code enforcement officer, assuming there's no new construction. If somebody was building new construction, then it'd trigger site plan review in all likelihood. So that would be the definition of a homestay. The next level up would be bed and breakfast, which would be defined as, again, a type of lodging in a single-family owner-occupied dwelling that would have no more than 4 bedrooms, serving no more than 8 transient guests, could serve food to guests only. That is, it couldn't open up a restaurant for outside visitors. Limited to 28 days at a time, per calendar year. There would there could be, somebody could stay for 28 days, but no longer. The reason for these day limitations, not that they're very enforceable in a lot of ways, except on complaint with, reasonable evidence that somebody is violating. But the reason for these day limits really is to try to assure or assuage the fear that they will become backdoors for rentals, particularly for students. And, the worry is that you open up another loophole where student housing can enter into neighborhoods in ways that were not contemplated by the town's various ordinances. So that's why they're there. And then above that, you'd be a hotel or a motel. And the bed and breakfasts would be allowed with planning board review in the residential districts, but in the MDR district only if the lots front on one of the major roadways and they're listed. So it couldn't be on a side street, but it could be on a major roadway. Side street would be limited to homestays, and permitted also in all the commercial districts and university district. So that's the proposal. The worry that, as I talk to my colleagues here in Town Hall, Dave Mylan and Code Enforcement Bill Murphy and others, and also to some folks who I know are involved with Airbnb and so forth, is that it would be easy to follow what appears to be a very logical hierarchy, and that opens up the diversity of opportunity without, with having reasonable controls on them so that they don't overtake neighborhoods or places and make them uncomfortable. It all seems very reasonable, but then I do worry about unwittingly shutting down things that are already going on without any evident problems. And there are 2 things in particular that trying to make sure that doesn't happen unless somebody says that's okay. It can happen to do that. One situation is that aside from these travelers accommodations, these are meant for travelers, visitors who are meant to be, who live someplace else, who are meant to be here for a visiting reason. But recognize that in that context. In our ordinance, as in most ordinances, zoning ordinances, we also have a definition of a use called rooming houses. And a rooming house is a single-family owner-occupied dwelling that rents rooms to up to 6 individuals. They could be students, they could be piano teachers, they could be residents from the Eastern Maine Medical Center, they could be somebody on sabbatical, they just rent rooms. Rooming houses are defined as as a single-family owner-occupied dwelling with more than 2 such rooms that are let. If you're 2 or 1, there is no, it can happen everywhere, it probably does happen everywhere, and it's not regulated. You have to register within a rental registration, but you can do it. If you want to take in a roomer for a semester, or for a year, or for 2 months, you can do it.
Like AFS students, would that be?
Well, I think that, I mean, I think there's a difference between that and guests. In other words,
Yeah.
you're charging a fee, you're renting something for a fee. But they're not visitors. They could be here very long-term, or they could be here for, an extended stay. So that happens now. We know it does because people come in under rental registration and say, I rent a room, or I rent 2 rooms, and here's my $25 registration fee. That's all. That's all that's necessary, and it's allowed everywhere. It's never in the context of transient visitors, but there's a chance that now we come in with a definition of a regulation of something called homestays, with things like no more than 7 consecutive days and no more than 14 days a semester, or a year, or a 3-month period, which is the equivalent to a semester. And now all of a sudden, we have regulated out of existence this very long-standing thing that happens in some homes, where people have extra space and they're earning some extra money. I mean, I think we might be able to avoid that through careful definition of that this is really intended for the visitor economy and not for other situations, but something that I want to make sure you're aware of. The second situation that we might unwittingly close out, and we don't intend to, is the property owner on Pushaw Lake who comes and stays in their camp for a few weeks out of the summer, but they rent it out to somebody else who comes in and rents it for a week or 3 weeks or something. Been going on since the word camps was invented. And now all of a sudden, are we going to treat them as commercial lodgings that fall under one of these things and under one of the restrictions here?
Could we just, I see the concern, and I think it's good. Could we just, at the beginning of this segment, or maybe following homestay, just as we did with the storage units, self-storage units, where we said they were separate from these other things, could we just put in a couple of sentences that say, this does not apply to renting your camp to someone, and it does not apply to renting a room in your house to someone for more than 2 weeks or something, to separate them from somebody who's here for just a short period of time.
Yep. I think it's probably easily done in a rooming house. There are going to be times out at Pushaw Lake where, in fact, they are doing a homestay, or they are doing Airbnb, they are doing something, other times that they're not. So it's a gray area for me, but I think that, a statement of intent within the definition would help a future code enforcement officer and the public figure out what was intended here, and do I fall under this or don't I fall under it? I think, so that's a good suggestion.
You had another
The way you
alternative?
adopt it, at this point, I don't think it's covered properly. And I've had discussions with Dave Mylan about this, our economic development director, and he may have some thoughts about it too, but it's worthy of discussion here and trying to sort out, make sure we don't trip over something we didn't intend to trip over.
So Evan, I'm still not clear, really, what are we trying to solve by creating the homestay? Is there a problem now that this is trying to solve, or are we just trying to get our arms around a new?
It's unclear right now. I think it's unclear. I'll just say the Airbnb phenomenon, although it's more than Airbnb. I'll just use that because we understand what that is. There is, the lodging industry is changing because of this phenomenon known as the shared economy, manifested in things like Airbnb in the lodging world. That's new. And we have this ordinance that says bed and breakfast. Here's what bed and breakfast is. That's all it is. And you can do that. But if you're doing something else besides that, then it might not be allowed. And in a way, the homestay was meant to legitimize within limits, single-family home, owner-occupied, and so forth, within limits, what is now being done.
So the homestay, it just sounds like, because it sounds like the homestay is a temporary version of a rooming house. And if a rooming house is already defined, is that a case where we could do an either-or?
Yeah, maybe. Now, a rooming house is more than 2 units, and is only allowed in certain districts. It's not allowed, for example, in a medium-density residential district. And the idea here was a homestay is a kind of home occupation, one of those kinds of home occupations that can just happen, as long as it's a homestay and, defined in a pretty limited way. And so it's intended to legitimize some things that are going on in the economy, but in a, fairly governed way. And the unwitting effect may be that it might regulate something out of existence that's now going on fine. And so so one question I had was, maybe you don't even need it. Maybe everybody can just fit in under the fact that it would be a rooming house if it was more than 2, but they're under 2, so they're not a rooming house, and they're just people who are opening up their doors to people who want to be here. And they have to register and run to rental registration, but maybe they don't have to do anything else in terms of land use ordinance. Other questions will arise later on when the state decides that Airbnb units are subject to the lodging tax. Then what? I don't know.
How about, I'm gonna open up the public hearing, because you had mentioned Dave Mylan.
He might, I don't want to.
And he came here, and we gotta make him speak, so. I'm just curious on just your perspective, Dave.
Mr. Chairman, members of the planning board, thank you. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Dave Mylan. I'm the Economic Development Director here in Orono. And this is an issue that has been really some fun debate downstairs, because we've gone round and round and round with this, and it seems like Evan was in one position and I was in another position, and by the end of our conversation, we completely switched. And then the next day we talk about it, we're off again, because as Evan so eloquently put it, is the concern is that we don't inadvertently prohibit something that we weren't trying to do. We weren't trying to prohibit. So the question, the good question about why we even talking about this, why did it get brought up, truly was because of the advent of the Airbnb type of businesses. We had we've got people that were contacting us and saying, look, I can go online and I'm seeing that there's 12 or 13 of those in Orono. What regulation, what are you doing to regulate it? I'm also I've had conversations, I call them listens, because it really wasn't a talk, I just got to listen, with lodging businesses who are seeing an impact on their business because of the advent of those types of facilities. That's literally taking businesses away, and they're talking about the fairness doctrine of they've got to pay all these lodging taxes and all these other things that they're required to do, but these facilities are not. And as Evan explained to you, I live on a lake in Orland, and probably 60% of the lake is houses are rented out by the week all summer long. It's just something that it's been that way since as long as I can ever remember there. So I said, I'm assuming that Pushaw has the same the same things happening. People do that in order to pay for their property tax, and it works. And they've been, again, doing it for a long time. If that is something that the town does not want to touch, doesn't want to impact, then we need to be cognizant of that so that we're doing this. As part of the public conversation that we've had, we've heard from people who said, I'm doing, I do this, or I've been doing that, and been doing it forever, and nobody's ever even noticed it, and it was literally kind of, I'm not saying running under the radar, but it was because it was something that was permissible. And it is permissible. And so, again, we go back to our conversations downstairs and say, okay, well, are we really trying to, what are we trying to do here? And you'll hear me say in the future is, one of the things I always like to do when we're dealing with ordinances is what's the legislative intent? What is it that the legislative body is trying to do when they enact an ordinance? And I've spoken to members of the council to see if they'd be interested in initiating that type of a thing, that every time an ordinance is created, that there's a legislative intent at the beginning of it to say, here's what we're trying to do, so that if it's even though an ordinance says thou shalt not do this, it's an unintentional consequence. If it was the intention of the ordinance to do something different, then we have the ability to be able to enforce it as such. So, as I like to tell people, that speed limits are written out there, but it doesn't mean that the police department's stopping everybody for going 1 mile over the speed limit. So, all this being said, I think that the conversation, and I was pretty happy that I stayed out of the first conversation about the warehousing, because I really, really enjoyed listening to your conversation. You looked at it from every different angle, and I actually, a couple times I was going to say something, I thought, let me just listen to see, and you eventually got to everything I was thinking of. You got to it. I really like that. So I certainly commend you for so that you weren't beating a dead horse at all. You literally looked at it from every different angle, and that's what we want you to do. So this one is an even better example of, we think this is what we need to do.
Just to clarify, we think, because you mentioned differing opinion, we think, so we're sticking with leave homestay in there. So, assuming that.
I think we should.
Okay. That's just, I want to clarify that, yep.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think it should be in there because I think there needs to be a clear distinction as to what an activity is. And Evan's done a good job of defining that. As I said, I think he's talked himself out of it a couple of times. And I've tried to keep talking him back into it. I like the way it is, what he's proposing. I hope that's
Okay.
as clear as mud.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. Other members of the public? I'm going to leave the hearing open. That's interesting. Krista made a point where just definition tweaks to make sure that we're not shutting the door. You mentioned 2 examples. You've said you've heard from members of the public, I think both of you. So we don't want to shut the door on any opportunities. That's not what we intended with a comp plan. But if we can clarify it, so I'm not thinking of how we tweak those definitions, but that seems to make sense. I like what Krista said, that we try to keep it simple.
Yes, and I could try to come
Yep.
up with such clarifying language, which basically gets to intent, so that somebody who's enforcing this, but recognize that there are going to be these gray areas, because you could have a seasonal camp that really is operating like an Airbnb, or there may be very little to distinguish it.
Because you came up with 2, I'm just thinking about what others aren't we thinking of?
The other ones, we don't want to shut out people doing the rooming. Oh, yeah, the 2, I said, yeah. There's another thing that we might be tripping into that we
Yeah.
haven't even thought
I'm
of.
just, wondering.
Yeah.
So I have one question. Would the seasonal camp rental, would that fall outside of the current definition? If you're, let's say you had more than 2 rooms in that camp that were furnished, am I getting too specific in?
No, you're not getting too specific. I don't think there's never been any thought that I know of to regulate that, activity. And, at this point, the intent was not to do so, unless they were hanging a shingle, basically, and said, we're a bed and breakfast. And, anybody who wants to come in and call and make a reservation and stay for 2 nights and then leave and, operate as a bed and breakfast. I mean, I don't know really what the difference in impact is from that versus somebody saying, I love staying here, could I rent it again for the same 2 weeks next year? But I think one's a kind of a traditional use that even though money is exchanged, it's kind of, I'm not sure we think of it as a commercial activity, and the other is explicitly a commercial activity.
I did hear Dave's comment about, listening to our larger establishments here, that they probably pay a fair number of fees. I don't know what those are, but, so right now, the minimum would be, in any one of these instances, that they would pay a $25 rental registration fee?
Yes.
So there would be at least some fee.
Right now, I'm not sure the hotels do that or the bed and breakfast, but right now, if you are renting a room to I'll call it roomer, R-O-O-M-E-R, you pay a $25 fee for that unit under the rental registration ordinance. We keep a record of that.
So does the definition already answer this for us? Because the very first few words of a homestay, it's a type of home occupation, not a camp. It doesn't say seasonal camp, it doesn't say other structure, it's a home,
Right.
not a camp. So I think it's already protected.
Yeah, that's a good point. It is a single-family owner-occupied dwelling, and a camp as a second home may not
I own a camp
fit.
out of town, I do.
Yeah.
I can tell you that it's not my home, I wish that it were. My home is here, and because it's not my home, I have no voting rights in the town. I don't get any tax advantages and all that. So really, yes, I own that. I don't rent it out, but I may someday. But I don't view that as a home occupation if I choose to rent that out. So I think we're already protected by what you have
I
here.
think that's a very good point. That's a really good distinction. And to Krista's point, that can be part of the statement of distinction between
Correct, yeah.
basically a second home or a camp that's not really operating as a home occupation.
Primary residence or something.
Yeah.
The other, the part of that, the question that you have to ask on that is, when you're talking about a home occupation, you're talking about a homeowner occupying that. So when someone, whereas a camp, it may be my home, maybe my primary home, but I'm renting it out for a week at a time during the summer, but I'm not there.
Right.
I'm leaving, and so the distinction has to be that if it's owner occupied, then it kind of fits in. If the owner is not present, then it's a different classification. Is that what I'm hearing?
That seems to be what it would be, yes.
Right.
So there was another comment too about clarifying what the purpose is, transient I think I heard you make a comment of that. So another distinction or clarification is part of what these are all about, so we don't limit opportunities.
Right, and in that regard, we can lift right from the comprehensive plan, because the comprehensive plan said, here's what the issue is, here's what the goal is, here's what the objective is, and here's what an implementing measure should be.
Okay.
So we can lift that. It'd be easy to have a statement of intent embodied in the council order.
And hopefully that will, again, remove some gray area, not all of it, but
Yep.
maybe that'll clear it up.
Good suggestion.
Other comments?
So would there be anything that would prevent somebody, for instance, to rent their entire home through an Airbnb mechanism?
Yes, the definition limits it now. I wouldn't be surprised if there's some people who are doing that right now. But Airbnb, as a homestay, which could be Airbnb, rented through Airbnb or directly or anything else, that's neutral as to how it gets rented, but is limited to no more than 2 bedrooms. And, so you're not renting the kitchen out, you're not renting out, the whole house, you're renting 2 bedrooms as a home occupation, as an owner-occupied situation. And this is the sort of thing, the big debate in large cities and heavy tourist towns and things like that is how that we're going to be encompassed in a much larger debate than the town of Orono with some of this stuff. But this seems to fit what Orono is and what the comprehensive plan suggested we do.
Mike?
Let's see, we currently do not regulate the renting out of whole houses. If somebody were to say go away on sabbatical and wanted to rent their house while they were gone, they can just do it, right?
Yes.
Just have to register.
Have to register and rental registration.
Mike?
You had mentioned some concern with some of the commercial inns with R&B. What do you call it, AR&B or the?
Airbnb.
Yeah.
Well, that would be up to those inns lobbying the state legislative across the country and per state to come up with regulations whereby the towns would have to follow suit anyway, so they would initiate that. Does that make sense?
Yes, yeah, I mean, a lot of their concern falls outside of our jurisdiction and authority.
Right.
Good point. Other comments? Did we clarify that? All right, so there was, I think we.
So if I can summarize, what I understand your recommendation that you'd like me to convey to the council would be to adopt this proposed amendment dealing with travelers accommodations, building this hierarchy of uses of homestay, bed and breakfast, hotel, motel, as defined, but with a clear statement of intent built into the definitions and into the council order that this is not intended to regulate certain activities that are not now regulated and appear to be benign uses, including seasonal camps and fewer than activities that would be a rooming house if it were, but involving only 2 rooms. That really aren't getting at transient guests. It's really getting at people who are here for long extended terms as
Okay.
residents.
All right, last call on public hearing before I close it. All right, I think we're ready for a motion.
Okay. Well, I will move that we recommend to the council that they, that we tell them that we support this document as it is written, with the clarification of what the homestay applies to. In other words, to make clear that there are certain things it doesn't cover, as we discussed.
I second it.
Yeah, and did we capture the, I guess, emphasis on transient and the emphasis, so,
Versus residency.
Correct.
Albeit maybe temporary, but
all right.
that may be a key distinction. We're using those words, is that somebody who is renting a room from somebody, I think regards themselves as a resident. It might be a short-term resident, but they're a resident of the town, maybe even to the point of registering to vote or registering their car here or something like that, versus somebody who is a visitor, a transient.
So what Krista said, plus the emphasis on
yes.
transient.
Those clarifications. I'll find the right words. I've been struggling with it, but I
Okay.
think this
Yeah.
is helping me a lot, so.
Okay. Very good. We have an amended motion.
Seconded?
We have further discussion. All those in favor? It is unanimous. Thank you. More good discussion. All right, we have one more ahead of us. Continuation of the proposed land use ordinance amendment to section 18-31 definitions, section 18-105 purpose of districts, and section 18-106 subsection E and F schedule of uses concerning certain land uses and dimensional standards in the C1, C2, and EDZ districts. And this again is a hearing continued from our last meeting, July 27th, 2016.
Yes, and you did also conduct, you opened the hearing actually back in May and
True.
did a fairly thorough review of it and discussion of it, but you noted an omission, and you asked me to go back and fill that omission, which was, as we allow for the potential of some residential use, multifamily residential use in the economic development zoning district, there needed to be density and other, minimum lot size, all those standards, and you asked me to add those, so I've gone through and done that. Just, why don't I,
May was a long time ago.
May was a long time ago, so let me just say what this does, and most of this comes right out of the comprehensive plan, and it's implementing what the comprehensive plan recommended. So one, it clarifies the definition of light industry, and allows light industry to be located in the commercial one portion of the main technology park, as well as the commercial one district west of I-95. There was ambiguity there again, and so this is a cleanup of that. And there, the comprehensive plan was trying to look toward the time when some of the new startup enterprises might spin off into a production mode, and that we wanted to make sure we had provision for them to locate in the community if they in fact grow to that production level. Second, it would allow residential use of a higher density, multifamily type of use in the economic development district, with standards, and those standards are the same, identical to the standards that are for the commercial 2 district. Third, it does reduce the certain minimum lot sizes and frontages in the commercial 1, commercial 2, and economic development zone district, and you can see that in the chart. And we had discussed the rationale for that. So instead of minimum lot sizes in the EDZ of 80,000, 100,000, 120,000 square feet, which is 2 to 3 acres, it would go down to an acre to an acre and a half, which is ample for many of the types of small businesses that we see wanting to be here. It would reduce the minimum lot area in the C1 and C2 districts where there is off-lot sewer or water to from 60,000 square feet to 40,000 square feet, and if it's relied on septic system and wells, we reduce it from 120,000 square feet to 60,000 square feet. Again, as per the comprehensive plan, it's meant to accommodate the fact that the kind of inquiries we get are not typically large users. It's the user that wants a 5,000 square foot building or an 8,000 square foot building, which can easily fit on an acre and a half lot. It would proportionally reduce the minimum frontage requirement from 200 feet to 100 feet. But then when we get to the residential use, this is, I guess, one of the core things in the district. on the one hand, it would reduce the threshold minimum lot size in order to be able to have a residential use in the commercial 2 or now the EDZ district. Right now, the residential uses are not allowed in the EDZ. So if somebody wanted to build an apartment facility within the EDZ district, they couldn't do it, even though it might be close to where they work or might be able to cater to those who want to have an apartment close to where some of the jobs are being created. So on the one hand, it does that, reduces that minimum lot size threshold. So it would now say that you got to have at least 15,000 square foot lot. If you got water and sewer, you're going to have at least 30,000 or 40,000 square foot lot if you have one or neither water or public sewer, all of which is consistent with state plumbing code. But on the other hand, it changes the density standard. It doesn't change the overall density standard in terms of units per acre, per net acre. That would still stay as it is. But in the C2 zone and now the EDZ zone, it would also regulate number of bedrooms per acre. We don't know if there will be other large apartment complexes coming in to the community someday in the future. But the tendency of the apartment complexes is to not just max out the number of dwelling units per acre, but also the number of bedrooms per dwelling unit. So you not only get, say, 8 dwelling units per acre, but you end up with 8 times 4 or 8 times 5 bedrooms per acre. And each of those bedrooms has this automobiles associated with it and pavement. And as we have seen, it tends to push to the limits the pressure on wetlands or other resources within the parcels that they are locating. Now, as Jeremy might be interested, the comprehensive plan does urge that future large-scale apartment complexes be located within the university district rather than on, so that there's less crossing of roads and everything else. But wherever it was, if it's in the C2 or the EDZ zone, it would be limited to, let me look at the chart. In the cluster section, because most of these developments occur under the cluster ordinance. So if you go towards the end, on page 10, it would be a maximum, if you've got public water and public sewer, a maximum of 16 bedrooms per net residential acre. So you could have 8 units per acre, but they would have to average 2 bedrooms per unit. If you wanted to build 4-bedroom units, you could only have 4 units per acre. So that's intended to reduce whatever remaining pressure on whatever remaining parcels exist for development or redevelopment in the C2 district, or the C2 district could someday expand. So that, and that same would apply to the EDZ. Mm-hmm. So that's, let me see if there's anything else that this amendment does. It increases the maximum lot building height to 45 feet. That's already allowed with site plan approval. 50 feet would be allowed with site plan approval. Fire equipment can easily handle that height. So that's the package of changes.
Just to reiterate, though, we had discussed this quite a bit, and we were just filling in some blanks.
Yes, you asked me to fill in some gaps, and nothing else was changed since May, but it's still an open hearing, and
All right.
And you've come to know recommendations on this at this point.
I am going to open up the public hearing and invite questions from the board. I mean, this seems to jibe with what we had intended with the comp plan. Now we're just putting some numbers to it.
I'm basically good with it. I have just one small editorial suggestion, and that is, maybe it's just me, but I was having trouble on page 5 and again on page 6, where we talk about off-lot sewer or water, or off-lot sewer and water. And the two sound so much alike that I kept thinking, we've got the same line twice. And I kept looking and looking what was different, and I finally found the or. And I'm wondering if we could maybe put that in bold, the and the or in bold, so that it's immediately apparent that that's the difference between the two lines.
We could do that. Of course, that would be a universal change in the ordinance, more than just this district, because that's
Correct.
this simply picks up what's in the whole big, long
Correct.
table that's in the ordinance that applies to all districts. But that's a good idea. And whether we do it here or it's part of the overall housekeeping of this ordinance, which is going to happen eventually,
Right.
that's an excellent suggestion. I must say I had the same problem when I first got here and looked at how the chart was arranged.
So, again, if we keep a running tally, because we'll be reviewing several ordinances, so if we have a universal comment,
We may be able to simply
can-
do this right now, just
Yeah.
call for that change in the ordinance. It's just a format change is all.
right,
And-
I'm just thinking if it applies
Yeah.
to, like you said, if we had to do this on a larger scale, that we could just have a running tally of
Yeah,
universal changes, but
yep.
good suggestion. Other comments? Those of you that didn't participate again in comp plan, we spent quite a while with this because the inundation of just back to back to back huge housing complexes. So we spent an awful long time trying to figure out how to minimize future impact from that. That's what all this is coming out of. So, a lot of discussion. Invite other comments from the public. I'm going to close the hearing. Any other questions? All right. So, Evan, that could have been a suggestion, the understanding where it's either now or universal apply it ordinance-wide. I don't know what the preferred
I'll
option is.
just,
Some way to
I
emphasize
think,
it.
I think it might be able to be done now,
Okay.
quite apart from the commercial thing. It's just, it happens, it's applicable to every zoning district has that same language, so,
Okay,
that same formatting, yeah.
very good. I am ready for a motion then.
Okay, well, I propose we support or recommend the proposed amendments to Land Use Ordinance concerning certain land uses and dimensional standards in the Commercial 1, Commercial 2, and Economic Development Zone districts. That we support this document as it has been put together.
I guess, again, with the clarification on the and/or
Yeah.
item, so. There we go. Thank you again, Krista. So motion as a minor amendment? Yeah, minor tweak.
Seconded.
Very good. Further discussion? All those in favor? Very good. Unanimous again. Next item on the agenda, discussion. Hearing none, we're moving on to adjournment. Can I have a motion? Very good.
So moved.
Very good. A second? So Mike had a motion. Do you want to be the second this time? You
I'll
go.
be the second,
Very
yes,
good.
second.
Yes, taking one for the team. All right, discussion? All right.
Sorry, I didn't hear you, Mike.
All those in favor? Thank you, folks.
Thank you.
See you next month.
Yes, there will be a meeting next month. There will be a preliminary subdivision plan application before you, and from M&M Truck Sales, the Union Street subdivision called Riverside Estates. You have their application. you know, we're now going through our review process as staff, and so you'll have our, no other items at this point. You know, there's always a chance that another land use amendment will be referred to you, but I'll be meeting with council. Sophie is trying to arrange to almost a 2-meeting-a-month session with the council on various implementing of the comprehensive plan between now and next June. So, and then, so self will be coming forward.
Yes.
Thank you.
Hey, Kevin, how are you? Good, thanks.
We adjourned.
Okay.